"Cowboy, do you desire me like the others?" asked the Apache widow as he stepped closer. The hot sun hung low over the frontier town, painting the wooden buildings in shades of gold and brown. Dust swirled through the narrow streets, kicked up by the occasional horse or the wind that always seemed to follow the hills. In the heart of this small town, near the edge of the prairie, stood a modest trading post. Its wooden boards were worn from years of wind and sun, but it still carried a sense of life and resilience, much like the woman who ran it. The widow, an Apache woman with dark, thoughtful eyes, moved quickly through the small space. Her hands were skilled and steady, arranging goods on the shelves, stacking bundles of cloth, and keeping the few supplies she had neatly organized. Despite her quiet demeanor, there was a strength in her posture, a resilience that came not from choice but from necessity. Since the death of her husband, life had been a constant struggle. Each day was a battle to ensure her children had enough to eat, enough warmth at night, and enough safety from the dangers that lurked both outside and within the town. Her children, two small boys, played quietly in the corner of the store. Their laughter was soft, almost shy, but it brought a warmth to the widow's heart that nothing else could. She often paused in her work to glance at them, her lips curling into a brief, gentle smile. Life was hard, but in those moments it felt bearable. She had learned to find small joys where she could, because the frontier offered little comfort beyond the necessities of survival. That morning, like most mornings, began with a routine, checking the shelves, counting supplies, and sweeping the dust that seemed to settle faster than she could remove it. The town was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy in the air. Only the faint clip-clop of a distant horse echoed across the dusty streets. She straightened her back and continued her work, her mind wandering to the stories her husband used to tell her, stories of courage and wisdom, of moments when the world seemed wide and full of possibilities. She missed him with a sharpness that never truly faded. The bell above the door jingled suddenly, pulling her out of her thoughts. She looked up, alert. A man had entered, his boots raising small clouds of dust as he stepped inside. He was tall and rugged, his face weathered by the sun, his hat casting a shadow over eyes that seemed calm yet wary. The widow's heart skipped for a moment, not out of fear, but from an instinct she could not explain. There was something different about this man. Something steady, something quiet but strong. He carried himself with a sense of purpose but not arrogance. "Morning," he said, his voice low but steady, carrying the hint of weariness from long hours on the road. He glanced around the store, taking in the sparse supplies. "I need some provisions," he added, his eyes briefly meeting hers before moving to the shelves. The widow nodded, her hands moving automatically to gather the items he would need. She felt a strange curiosity, a pull toward this stranger who had walked into her life so suddenly. Most men who came to the town were either traders, prospectors, or wanderers with little interest beyond their own gain. But this man seemed different. She could not explain it, and she did not try. Instead, she focused on her work, measuring and weighing, counting coins, and keeping her interactions brief but polite. As she handed him the supplies, their fingers brushed lightly. It was a fleeting touch, but it sent a ripple through her chest. She quickly turned her attention elsewhere, adjusting a stack of flour sacks to hide the warmth she felt. The cowboy's eyes, dark and thoughtful, met hers again, and for a moment the room seemed smaller, quieter. He was not smiling, but there was a softness there, a hint of gentleness that contrasted with the ruggedness of his appearance. "I can pay," he said, laying coins on the counter. They clinked softly, but the sound seemed louder than usual in the quiet of the store. He did not rush, did not act as though he had somewhere urgent to be. There was patience in his movements, a kind of respect that the widow found unusual. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady even as her mind raced. There was a carefulness in her words, a way of protecting herself from disappointment. She had seen too many men come and go, promising more than they could give, leaving her heart wary. But something about this man made her curious, made her wonder if he was here for a reason beyond the ordinary. He gathered his supplies, pausing for a moment as if to say something, but then seemed to decide against it. The widow watched him leave, the bell above the door jingling once more as he stepped out into the sunlight. She exhaled, realizing her hands had been holding the counter tightly, her heart beating faster than it should have. She shook her head slightly, trying to dispel the strange mixture of anticipation and unease she felt. The rest of the morning passed slowly. The widow continued her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the cowboy. Who was he? Why did he seem so different from the others? She tried to focus on the children, on the chores, on the constant maintenance of her trading post, but the memory of his presence lingered, like a shadow at the edge of her mind. By afternoon, the town had come alive with activity. Dusty wagons creaked along the streets, and townspeople shouted greetings to one another, trading news, gossip, and supplies. Yet even in the bustle, she found herself glancing toward the door, almost expecting him to return. There was a quiet hope, fragile but persistent, that maybe this man would come back. And if he did, perhaps the world would feel a little less lonely. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, the widow closed the store for the day. She called the children to her, and together they walked toward the small cabin behind the trading post. Her mind was still alive with thoughts of the cowboy, the way he moved, the way he listened, the careful respect in his eyes. She could not explain it, but she felt a sense of calm and safety she had not felt in a long time. Night settled over the town, and the prairie stretched beyond the limits of sight. The widow sat by the fire with her children, preparing a simple meal. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind wandered, replaying every moment of the encounter, every word, every glance. She knew that the world was still harsh, that life would continue to be difficult, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark, a fragile hope that perhaps not all strangers brought only danger or disappointment. Sleep eventually came, heavy and dreamless, but even in her dreams, the image of the cowboy lingered, his calm presence etched into her memory. She could not know yet how he would affect her life, nor what challenges lay ahead, but a subtle change had begun, like the first stirrings of wind before a storm. And in the quiet of that frontier night, a small part of her dared to imagine that perhaps this encounter was the start of something different, something real. The next morning, the widow woke before sunrise. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth from the nearby hills. Her children were still asleep, curled under the thin blankets she had managed to stitch together. She moved quietly through the cabin, careful not to disturb them, and stepped outside to the trading post. The world was painted in soft hues of pink and gold as the sun rose slowly over the prairie. Birds chirped in the distance, their songs mingling with the occasional creak of wagon wheels and the distant bark of a dog. The widow began her morning routine, arranging the goods and tidying the small space. Her mind, however, was not entirely on the chores. She could not stop thinking about the cowboy. His quiet presence lingered in her thoughts like a gentle shadow. She had spent the night replaying their brief encounter, wondering what kind of man would travel through the harsh lands with such calmness and respect. Most men she had known were loud, boastful, or self-centered. This man was none of those things. As she worked, the bell above the door jingled once more. Her heart gave a small jump and she quickly straightened, smoothing her hair and adjusting her clothing. The cowboy had returned. He walked in with the same careful calm, carrying a small pack slung over his shoulder. His hat shaded his eyes, but she could see the faint curve of a smile playing at his lips. "Good morning," he said quietly. There was no boast, no pretense, just a simple greeting. "Good morning," she replied, her voice steady, though her chest felt slightly tighter than usual. She gestured toward the counter. "What brings you back?" he shrugged, setting his pack down gently. "Needed some supplies. And I thought I might help if you didn't mind." His tone was careful, as if he were asking permission rather than offering. The widow hesitated for a moment. Help was not something she was used to accepting, especially from strangers. She had learned to manage on her own, to rely on no one but herself. But there was something in the way he spoke, a quiet honesty that made her consider it. Slowly she nodded. "All right, you may help." Over the next few hours they worked side by side. The cowboy swept the floor, stacked barrels, and repaired a broken shelf, all with steady, careful hands. The widow observed him as he worked. He moved with purpose but without haste. His silence was not awkward. It was comfortable, like the quiet that comes after a long storm. Occasionally, he spoke in short sentences, asking about supplies or commenting on the weather. She noticed the way he watched her children from time to time, ensuring they stayed safe while she worked. At first, the widow was cautious, keeping her distance emotionally as she watched him work. She had been hurt before, and trust was a fragile thing. Yet, something about his presence made her feel safer than she had in months. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt the possibility of companionship, not just fleeting company, but genuine understanding. As the sun climbed higher, the widow decided to take a break. She stepped outside and carried a small bucket of water to the children, who were now playing near the edge of the property. The cowboy followed, carrying a bundle of firewood he had stacked. The children's laughter filled the air, and he smiled faintly, kneeling to help them gather small sticks for a pretend campfire. The widow watched him silently. She realized that this was not the behavior of a man seeking only to impress or take advantage. There was respect in his actions, kindness in his gaze, and patience in his manner. It was different from anything she had seen before, and she felt a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. By afternoon, word of the cowboy's presence had spread through the town. A few townspeople wandered by, exchanging glances and whispers. Some were curious, others suspicious. It was rare for a newcomer to stay long or to show such steady, quiet presence. The widow, however, paid little attention to the gossip. Her focus was on the small moments, on how he laughed softly at the children's antics, how he helped her fix a broken crate, and how he never once acted as if he were better than anyone else. As they worked, she found herself sharing small stories about her life, about the challenges she faced running the trading post alone, and about the children. She spoke cautiously, testing the waters, unsure if he could understand or if he would simply leave when he had heard enough. But he listened. He did not interrupt, did not judge, did not offer empty advice. He simply listened, nodding occasionally, his dark eyes attentive. "You've done well keeping this place," he said quietly as they finished organizing the shelves. "It's not easy managing everything alone." The widow paused, surprised by the sincerity in his words. Most people would have dismissed her efforts as ordinary or expected. He saw her struggle and recognized her strength. For the first time in a long while, she felt that someone understood the weight she carried each day. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft. "It hasn't been easy, but we manage, somehow." He smiled faintly. "You're stronger than most, and brave too." Her cheeks warmed slightly at his words. She looked away, pretending to adjust a pile of cloth, though her mind was alive with questions. Strength and bravery were qualities she had always valued, but to have someone else acknowledge them felt new, almost foreign. Over the following days, their interactions became routine. He returned each morning, offering to help, sometimes carrying supplies from town, sometimes simply sitting and talking while she worked. Gradually, she began to share more small details about her life, about her husband, about the quiet moments she cherished with her children. Each time he listened with patience, never rushing her or pressing for more than she was willing to give. She noticed subtle things about him, too. The way he avoided confrontation, even when others were rude or dismissive. The way he treated every person with respect, regardless of their status in the town. The quiet determination in his movements, whether he was repairing a shelf or tending to the children. Each observation added to the growing sense that he was not like the men she had known before. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they sat outside the trading post, watching the children play. The wind carried the scent of grass and distant smoke from nearby chimneys. The widow took a deep breath, feeling a rare moment of peace. She glanced at the cowboy, noticing the way the fading sunlight caught the edges of his face. He looked thoughtful, distant, yet fully present at the same time. "You don't talk much about yourself," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. He shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Not much to say. Life's been long and full of mistakes. I try to leave that behind when I can." She studied him, sensing the weight in his words. There was a depth to his silence, a story behind the quiet eyes, and she felt a strange pull, a desire to know him, not just for the practical reasons of survival or companionship, but for the person he was beneath the surface. "I understand," she said finally. "I've had my share of loss too. Life doesn't give much choice sometimes, does it?" "No," he replied quietly, "but it does give us moments, small ones like this." His gaze swept over the children, the trading post, the wide-open prairie, moments that make it bearable. The widow nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest she had not felt in years. She realized that their bond was growing, not in grand gestures or loud declarations, but in quiet understanding, shared effort, and mutual respect. She began to allow herself a small hope, fragile but persistent, that perhaps this man was different, that perhaps this connection could last. That evening, after the children had been tucked into bed, she sat by the fire alone for a while, reflecting on the day. The memory of his quiet presence stayed with her, comforting and unsettling all at once. She knew that the frontier was still harsh, that dangers could appear without warning, and that life would continue to be difficult. Yet, for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of possibility, a chance that someone could enter her life and not disrupt it, but enhance it. As she finally drifted into sleep, she dreamt of the prairie under a soft, golden light, of children's laughter, and of a calm, steady presence beside her. And in that dream, for the first time in a long time, she felt not fear but hope. Days passed, and the widow noticed a change in herself. The presence of the cowboy in her life had become a quiet comfort, a rhythm she could depend on in the otherwise unpredictable days of the frontier. She found herself looking forward to his visits, wondering what small kindness he might offer, what story he might share, or simply enjoying the rare silence that was not lonely because he was near. Yet beneath the warmth she felt there was a shadow of doubt, a hesitation she could not dismiss. It was late afternoon when he arrived that day. The sun was dipping low, casting long, soft shadows across the dusty street. He rode slowly into the town, his horse kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The widow watched from the trading post doorway, noting how the quiet strength in his posture seemed even more pronounced as he approached. Her heart lifted at the sight of him, but her mind also whispered warnings. She had seen men like him before, or at least, men who appeared kind but eventually left without notice. She forced herself to stay calm, though her chest tightened with an unspoken question. Would he stay, or would he vanish like the rest? The cowboy dismounted with care, patting his horse gently before leading it toward the hitching post. He looked up at the trading post and gave a small, familiar nod. The widow returned the gesture, offering a polite smile, though her thoughts swirled with uncertainty. "Morning," he said softly, setting down a small bundle of supplies. "Thought I'd come early today and help with some chores." She nodded, but there was a tension in her shoulders that she could not hide. "All right," she said, her voice steady but faintly tight. She gestured toward the back, where the children played quietly. "Keep an eye on them while I finish inside." He nodded and moved toward the yard, gathering firewood and helping the children carry small sticks. She watched him for a moment, her heart torn between admiration and fear. He was gentle, careful, patient, a man who seemed to understand without being told. Yet she had been here before, opening her heart to strangers who promised friendship or love and then disappeared. Could she trust this one? Or would he vanish like the others, leaving her alone again, more wary than before? She returned inside, her hands busy with cleaning, but her mind refused to settle. The quiet clink of coins, the soft creak of the shelves, even the children's laughter, all seemed to echo her uncertainty. She remembered her husband's words from long ago, "Trust is earned, but don't let fear keep you from the people who might care." She sighed, feeling the weight of his absence and the lessons he had left behind. After a few hours, she decided to step outside. The sunlight was softer now, golden, and the air carried the faint scent of wild grass from the nearby hills. She walked slowly toward the cowboy, who was helping the children build a small pretend fort from sticks and stones. He glanced up at her, and for a brief moment the weight of his gaze felt almost heavy, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made her heart race. "You've been quiet today," he said gently. "Everything all right?" She hesitated, glancing down at her hands. She wanted to tell him everything, her fears, her doubts, the hesitance she felt whenever someone came too close, but the words seemed trapped in her throat. Instead, she shook her head slightly. "I'm fine. Just thinking." He nodded, accepting the answer without pressing further. That quiet patience was both comforting and frustrating. It made her feel safe, yet it reminded her of the vulnerability in trusting him. She loved that he respected her boundaries, but a part of her ached to know his true feelings. Finally, she took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "Cowboy," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to ask you something." He looked at her intently, waiting. Do you desire me like the others?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. She watched him carefully, her heart pounding, unsure if she wanted to hear the answer. She feared rejection, feared disappointment, feared the familiar sting of being left behind. Yet she needed the truth. She had opened a part of herself she rarely shared, and the silence that followed felt long and deliberate. The cowboy lowered his gaze for a moment, considering her words carefully. Then he spoke, his voice steady but quiet. "I won't lie. I've been hurt before, and I've hurt others too. But I do not seek to take what you have or to leave when it's convenient. My interest in you is different. It's not just desire, it's respect, it's care. It's wanting to be near you, not because I expect anything, but because I value what you are." The widow listened, her chest tightening as his words sank in. She could feel the truth in them, the honesty he carried like a shield. He did not make promises he could not keep, nor did he speak of grand gestures or fleeting passion. Instead, he offered something rare, a steady, patient, genuine presence. I don't know if I can believe that," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been disappointed too many times. I've let men in only to have them leave. I can't." She stopped, swallowing hard. Her eyes flicked to the children playing nearby, then back to him. "I can't risk it again." He nodded slowly, understanding her hesitation without taking offense. "I know," he said softly. "Trust is earned, not given lightly. I don't expect you to believe me right away. I only ask that you judge me by my actions, not just my words." For a moment, the wind carried the sound of the prairie across the small yard, stirring the dust and the leaves in gentle swirls. The children's laughter echoed faintly, a reminder of the fragile, everyday joys that life still offered. The widow felt a small shift within her, a quiet hope that perhaps not all men were the same, that perhaps this one could be different. Over the next few days, tension and doubt continued to hover in her mind. She watched the cowboy closely, analyzing each gesture, each word, each action. He remained consistent, always patient, always careful, always respectful. Slowly, her skepticism began to soften. She realized that while her fears were not unfounded, they were not the whole story. This man was proving, in quiet, deliberate ways, that he could be trusted. One evening, as the sun sank behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the widow found herself sitting beside him on a small bench outside the trading post. The children were playing quietly nearby, their laughter mingling with the soft rustle of the wind. She looked at him, searching his face for any hint of pretense, and found none. "I don't know if I can ever forget the past," she said softly. "I've been hurt too many times." He nodded, his dark eyes calm and understanding. "I don't ask you to forget. I only ask you to give this a chance. One small chance, without rushing, without pressure." She exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. The tension that had built over years of loss, fear, and solitude did not vanish, but it became manageable. Perhaps it was possible to allow someone in, not blindly, but carefully, with awareness and patience. Days turned into weeks, and the widow began to notice subtle changes in herself. She felt lighter when he was near, more confident in her own strength, more willing to share small details of her life. She laughed more easily, worried less constantly, and allowed herself moments of quiet reflection that were not clouded by fear. And through it all, the cowboy remained a steady presence, never rushing, never demanding, simply offering care and understanding. Their bond grew in quiet ways. The way he carried firewood without complaint, the way he listened to her stories, the way he helped her children without being asked. It was a bond built on respect, trust, and the small, everyday gestures that proved character more than words ever could. And still, the question lingered in her mind. Could she allow herself to hope? Could she open her heart without fear? She did not have an answer yet, but the small, patient actions of this man gave her the courage to try, to believe that perhaps not all strangers brought only disappointment or pain. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with purples and golds, the widow realized that the first true step toward trust had been taken. The cowboy's words and actions had not erased her past, but they had offered something far more precious, a chance for connection, for understanding, for the fragile beginnings of love. And in that quiet frontier evening, she allowed herself, just a little, to hope. The quiet of the town was suddenly broken one afternoon by the distant sound of raised voices and pounding hooves. The widow was at the trading post, arranging newly arrived supplies when a neighbor hurried in, breathless and anxious. "Trouble's coming," he warned, his eyes wide. "A band of outlaws is heading this way. They've been robbing travelers on the trail. They might come through town soon." The widow's hands froze on the crate she was moving. Fear surged through her, but she pushed it down. Panic was dangerous, it led to mistakes. She glanced toward the children playing outside, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension in the room. She had to protect them. From outside, she heard the familiar sound of hooves approaching. The cowboy was already riding toward the town, his horse kicking up dust in long, steady strides. Relief and worry battled inside her. Relief that he was here, worry for his safety. She knew the men coming were dangerous, desperate, and unpredictable. He dismounted near the trading post and surveyed the horizon. His eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the distant ridge where dust clouds marked the approach of several riders. Without a word, he moved with purpose, checking his equipment and making quick calculations in his mind. The widow watched, both impressed and anxious. He had the calm of a man who had faced danger before, yet she could sense the weight of responsibility he felt, not just for himself, but for her and her children. The children were called inside immediately. The widow tried to maintain a calm voice as she gathered them, explaining that it was only a precaution. Their small hands clung to hers, eyes wide with fear they did not fully understand. She felt her own heart hammering in her chest, but she forced herself to think clearly. "Stay inside and don't make a sound," she whispered firmly. no matter what you hear." The cowboy moved toward the front of the trading post, taking position where he could see anyone approaching while remaining partially shielded by barrels and crates. His movements were deliberate, careful, but decisive. He did not draw unnecessary attention, yet his presence alone sent a subtle message. He was ready, and he would not allow harm to come to them. The sound of horses grew louder, and the dust clouds on the horizon confirmed the warnings. The outlaws were approaching, and the widow felt a cold spike of fear run down her spine. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself that panic would not help. She stole glances at the cowboy, whose calm determination seemed to anchor her. Somehow, his quiet courage gave her a sense of strength she had not known she possessed in months. The outlaws arrived at the edge of town with loud shouts, demanding supplies and money. Their leader, a tall man with a cruel grin, dismounted first, waving a rifle. His gang spread out, scouring the street and shouting orders. The widow's stomach tightened. She could see the children huddled behind crates inside the trading post, peeking through small gaps. The cowboy stepped forward, his voice steady and confident. "This town is not yours to take. Leave now and no one will be hurt." The leader laughed harshly. "And who's going to stop us, little man? You." Without hesitation, the cowboy moved quickly to block their path, his posture firm. He did not draw a weapon yet, relying instead on the authority in his presence. The widow felt a swell of pride and awe mixed with fear. He was putting himself directly in danger to protect her and the children, and there was nothing she could do but trust him. The confrontation escalated as one of the outlaws charged toward him. The cowboy's movements were precise and practiced. He dodged, blocked, and maneuvered with a skill that revealed both experience and calm nerves under pressure. The widow watched from inside, holding her children close, praying silently that he would not be harmed. Each sound, the clash of a fist, the shout of a man, the rapid gallop of horses, made her heart leap. Despite the danger, the cowboy's calm did not waver. He moved with a careful strategy, protecting the trading post and creating distance between the outlaws and the building. His actions were deliberate, showing that he was not acting recklessly but thoughtfully, prioritizing safety over bravado. The widow felt a mixture of fear, admiration, and gratitude. She had begun to trust him emotionally, and now she saw firsthand why that trust was deserved. The children whispered questions, their small voices trembling. The widow reassured them softly, keeping her tone calm. "He's protecting us. Trust him." Hours seemed to stretch into minutes as the standoff continued. The cowboy negotiated, moved strategically, and protected the town with careful precision. Finally, the outlaws, realizing the town would not yield easily, decided to retreat. They mounted their horses and rode off into the distance, shouting threats that were meant to intimidate, but their departure marked the end of the immediate danger. The widow exhaled deeply, her knees weak from tension. She ran to the cowboy, who was checking the perimeter, ensuring no one else was nearby. Relief washed over her as she saw he was unharmed. You saved us," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head, his expression calm but tired. "No thanks needed, just part of the day." She studied him, realizing that the words could not capture the depth of what she felt. He had risked everything for her family, for the trading post, for a stranger's safety, and his courage had been quiet, purposeful, and selfless. She felt something shift inside her. Trust was no longer just an idea, it had been proven through action. That evening, as the sun set and the town slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the widow sat with the children, their small bodies pressed close as they recounted the events of the day. The cowboy joined them outside, sitting quietly, letting them speak first, letting the energy of the children dissipate before engaging. He asked gentle questions, offered kind observations, and remained present without dominating the conversation. The widow watched him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and growing attachment. The trials of the day had been frightening, but they had also revealed the strength of character she had sensed in him from the very beginning. Not only had he protected them, but he had done so without seeking recognition, without boasting, without asking for anything in return. His actions had spoken louder than any words could, and in those actions, she saw the possibility of something lasting. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly resumed its rhythm. The memory of the danger remained, a reminder of the fragility of life on the frontier, but it also became a symbol of the bond between them. The widow allowed herself to notice small details she had previously ignored, the way he smiled faintly when the children laughed, the care he took in preparing meals, the patience he showed in listening to her stories. Each moment reinforced the trust that had begun to take root. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence damaged during the outlaw's visit, the widow spoke softly, almost to herself. "You didn't have to risk yourself for us," she said, glancing at him. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was right. Because you and your children deserved protection." Her heart warmed at his words. She realized that this was the man she had begun to trust, the man who had shown her that courage and kindness could exist together. She felt a deepening of her feelings, a recognition that what she was experiencing was not mere gratitude, but something more profound, a connection built on shared experience, respect, and the understanding that trust, once tested, had proven itself true. That night, as she sat by the fire with the children asleep nearby, she reflected on the day's events. The trials they had faced had been frightening, but they had also been revealing. She no longer questioned whether she could trust him. She had seen it in his actions, in the calm, steady presence he offered, in the way he put their safety above all else. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that life could be more than survival, that it could include companionship, protection, and even the quiet beginnings of love. The frontier was still harsh, still unpredictable, but she had learned that courage and kindness could exist even in the most difficult circumstances. And in that knowledge, she found a sense of peace, a sense of security, and a sense of possibility that had long eluded her. The days after the outlaws had left passed quietly, almost peacefully. The town returned to its usual rhythm, though the memory of danger lingered in the minds of the townspeople. For the widow, life continued as before, but something inside her had shifted. The events of the past weeks had left a lasting mark, not just in fear or caution, but in something gentler and warmer, hope. The cowboy stayed nearby, not as a transient traveler, but as a steady presence. Each morning, he arrived at the trading post to help with chores, to check on the children, and to ensure that life ran smoothly. He no longer appeared as a stranger passing through, but as someone woven into the small, fragile rhythm of her days. She noticed how the children began to look forward to his visits, greeting him with laughter and eager questions. They asked him to help them build small toys from scraps, or to teach them simple tricks with ropes and sticks. He did so patiently, never losing his calm, and she watched with a mix of gratitude and quiet admiration. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, painting the town in warm amber light, the widow and the cowboy sat together outside the trading post. The children were nearby, playing quietly, their laughter mingling with the soft sounds of wind and distant horses. The widow glanced at him, noticing the lines of fatigue on his face, the careful way he handled each task, and the gentle attentiveness he showed to the smallest details. For a moment, she allowed herself to see him not just as a protector or helper, but as a person who belonged in her life. "You've stayed longer than I expected," she said softly, her voice carrying curiosity and a hint of wonder. He looked at her, a small smile forming at the edges of his lips. "I didn't leave. It felt right to stay." She studied him carefully, her mind racing with emotions she had long buried. Trust, hope, and a subtle, fragile longing for companionship swirled within her. "I've never had someone stay like this," she admitted. "Not for me, not for the children, not for what I have. You've changed that." He nodded, his eyes dark and sincere. "I don't claim to be perfect. I've made mistakes and I've walked away from things I should have stayed for. But with you, I wanted to be here. For you, for the children, for this life you've built. It matters to me." Her chest tightened at his words. For years, she had managed alone, building walls around her heart, convincing herself that dependence was weakness and trust was dangerous. Yet here was someone who had proven, time and again, through actions and patience, that trust could be rewarded, that companionship could exist without fear or harm. The sunset deepened, casting long shadows across the wooden boards of the trading post. The widow felt a quiet courage rising within her. She realized that hope was not a gamble, it was a choice, a careful, deliberate decision to allow someone into her life after they had earned the right. And the cowboy had earned that right, not through words or promises, but through steady, patient, and unwavering action. In the following days, the widow began to let herself imagine a life that included him, not as a fleeting presence, but as a partner, a companion, and a friend. The children, sensing the change in her mood, were lighter, happier, and more playful. They no longer asked questions in hushed tones about why he stayed or if he would leave. Instead, they trusted, as they always had when they followed her example. One evening, after a long day of work at the trading post, the widow and the cowboy sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear frontier sky. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of sage and wood smoke. Silence stretched comfortably between them, filled not with tension but with quiet understanding. "You've made this place feel safer," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't mean just from danger. I mean from fear, from loneliness, from uncertainty." He turned to her, his expression gentle and unguarded. "I didn't do it alone. You've done most of the work raising the children, keeping the trading post, surviving each day. I just helped where I could. I'm glad I stayed because I care." Her eyes softened. She realized that caring was not always about grand gestures or declarations. It was in the quiet attention, in shared tasks, in presence when it mattered most. She felt warmth spread through her chest, a mix of relief, gratitude, and something deeper that she was only beginning to name. Days became weeks, and the town accepted his presence as part of its rhythm. The widow noticed small changes in herself. She laughed more easily, she slept more peacefully, and she allowed herself moments of stillness that were no longer tinged with worry. The cowboy had become part of her life, and she realized that she no longer feared the possibility of being left behind. He had shown, in ways that could not be denied, that he would remain. One quiet morning, as she worked inside the trading post, she paused to watch him outside. He was helping the children build a small wooden cart, his movements patient, encouraging, and full of care. She felt a surge of gratitude and something else, something tender and fragile. She knew now that her heart, long cautious and protective, had room for trust and love again. Later that day, as the sun began to set, the widow found herself walking beside him toward the hills beyond the town. The children ran ahead, playing games of chase and laughter. She glanced at the cowboy, noticing how his expression softened in the golden light, how his presence seemed to fit naturally into the rhythm of her life. "You've changed everything," she said quietly. "Not just for me, but for them too. You've made our lives lighter." He shook his head, a small smile forming. "You've done the hard work. I just stayed by your side. That's all I ever wanted, to be part of it in whatever way I could." She looked at him, understanding fully now the meaning of his words. He had not come to claim her or take from her life. He had come to support, to stand beside, to share what she had already built. And that realization brought a peace she had not known in years. That evening, as they returned to the trading post, she felt a quiet confidence in her heart. She knew the road ahead would not always be easy. Life on the frontier was unpredictable, and challenges would continue to arrive. But for the first time, she felt that she did not have to face them alone. She had someone who respected her, cared for her, and had proven through actions that he would remain. The children ran into the trading post, their laughter filling the air. She watched the cowboy kneel to tie a shoelace for one, then helped the other reach a high shelf for a toy. She felt a swell of gratitude and affection, recognizing the depth of his commitment, not just to her, but to the family they had quietly begun to form together. As night settled over the town, the widow sat on the porch with the cowboy beside her. The stars shone brightly above, casting a gentle light across the quiet prairie. She felt a sense of hope, fragile yet strong, a quiet certainty that the bond they had built would endure. "I believe now," she said softly, her voice steady and warm, "that life can be more than survival, that it can be companionship and care and even love." He turned to her, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. "I believe that too," he replied. "And I'm grateful that I get to share it with you." The widow smiled, feeling a weight lift from her heart. The trials, the doubts, and the fears of the past weeks had not vanished, but they had been faced together, and their bond had grown stronger because of it. She realized that hope was not foolish, trust was not weakness, and love, quiet, steady, respectful love, was possible even in a harsh and unpredictable world. And in that quiet frontier night, with the children safe and sleeping nearby, the trading post standing solid against the prairie winds, and the cowboy by her side, the widow felt a deep, enduring sense of peace. Life would continue to challenge them, but together they were stronger, braver, and ready to face whatever came next. Hope had returned, trust had been earned, and love, gentle, steady, and true, had begun to bloom.